Okay, when I say the start of American history, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it 1776? Maybe Columbus in 1492? Well, what if I told you the real story actually has two completely different starting points, and they happened long before those famous dates? Let's dig into America's two real beginnings.
So, yeah, where does this whole story actually begin? It turns out we've probably been starting the clock way, way too late. By doing that, we've missed two entire foundational worlds that existed long before the United States was even a glimmer of an idea.
All right, so this first beginning, it takes us back thousands of years before any European ships even thought about crossing the Atlantic. And this isn't a story about an empty wilderness, not at all. It's about a continent that was absolutely teeming with complex, advanced societies. This is the first foundation we need to understand.
I want you to just picture this. The year is 1100. Europe is still deep in the Middle Ages. And right here in the heart of North America, a massive, bustling metropolis is thriving. It's a center of power, of trade, of culture, and chances are you've probably never even heard its name.
Yeah, this city was called Cahokia. And get this, it is absolutely staggering when you realize that at its peak, Cahokia's population was larger than London's at the very same time. We're talking about a city with these enormous earthen pyramids and a trade network that stretched from the Great Lakes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, this was no small village. This was a powerhouse.
And this level of sophistication wasn't just limited to awesome architecture and trade. All across the continent, native peoples developed these really intricate political systems, all based on diplomacy and law. These were governments with constitutions and principles that, honestly, might sound surprisingly familiar to us today.
Just take a look at the Iroquois Confederacy, for instance. It was formed centuries before the U.S. Constitution, and it operated under its own constitution, the Great Law of Peace. I mean, look at this. It created a union of nations. It had shared decision-making, a balance of power, and protections for individual rights. Does that sound familiar at all? Some historians argue that the seeds of American federalism are right here.
Okay, let's fast forward a few hundred years to our second hidden beginning. Before the American Revolution, you've got these 13 British colonies that were, and this is the surprising part, not very revolutionary at all. In fact, they were remarkably independent and, at the same time, deeply loyal to Britain.
So how is that even possible? Well, it was all because of this British policy called salutary neglect. It's a fancy term, but basically, for decades, Britain just kind of let the colonies run themselves. They didn't really enforce trade laws, and they allowed for a ton of self-governance. This whole hands-off approach shaped the entire colonial mindset.
And you can bet this policy had a huge effect. The colonists got used to some incredible freedoms. They were electing their own legislatures, they were deciding on their own local taxes, and for the most part, they were managing their own day-to-day affairs. They had gotten very, very used to running things their own way.
But here's the twist, the really crazy part. Despite all of this independence, they didn't see themselves as Americans just waiting to break free. No way. Many were incredibly proud British subjects. The idea of splitting from the king? It wasn't even on the radar. They saw themselves as part of the empire, enjoying all the rights of Englishmen.
So let's recap. We have these two totally separate, pretty stable worlds, the ancient, self-governing native nations and the independent, self-governing British colonies. But two specific events were about to come along and act as catalysts, shattering both of these foundations and setting them on an unavoidable collision course.
The first event, yeah, it's the one we all know, 1492. The arrival of Columbus didn't discover a new world. It slammed two very old worlds together, and that connection kicked off a process of transformation, conflict, and exchange that would forever change the destiny of the entire continent and all of its peoples.
Now, the second catalyst was a war. In 1754, the colonists and the British fought side by side to defeat the French, but victory came with a huge price tag. Britain was drowning in debt, and it decided its lazy policy of salutary neglect was officially over. It was time for the colonies to pay up and start following the rules. And that single decision, right there in 1763, it sparked a whole new kind of collision. This wasn't about ships and cannons anymore. This was a collision of fundamental ideas. Ideas about freedom, about rights, and about who is really in control. And this one question became the rallying cry for everything. For generations, colonists had believed they had the rights of Englishmen. So now, with these new taxes being slopped on them by a parliament where they had zero voice, They felt that fundamental right was being violated. The very identity they held so dear, being proud Britons, was now the basis for their rebellion.
So, how do we put these two completely different stories together? Well, the real American story isn't just about 1776 moving forward. It's about the convergence of these two vastly different histories, one ancient and indigenous, the other colonial and British, and the monumental changes that happened when they finally collided. So if there's one key takeaway, it's this. American history isn't a single, clean, linear path from European settlement straight to independence. It's the far more complex and, frankly, more fascinating story of what happened when these two established worlds, one of ancient American civilizations and one of self-ruling British colonists, were suddenly and permanently thrown together.
And that really leaves us with a final thought. If the United States emerged not from an empty wilderness, but from the convergence of these two deep-rooted foundations of self-governance, how does that change the way we understand the country's principles, its conflicts, and its identity today?